Victoria Sterling stepped out of her $300,000 red Ferrari at the suburban auto shop with rage distorting her face. Her Maranello had started making strange noises during her drive to the board meeting of her $800 million pharmaceutical company. She had no time for delays, no patience for incompetence. When mechanic Jake approached to assess the problem, Victoria exploded with threats and arrogance. Jake, 35 years old, hands dirty with grease but eyes incredibly intelligent, began inspecting the engine. After a few minutes, while explaining the technical problem in simple English, Victoria interrupted him, screaming, "Shut up, you moron! I don't have time for your ignorant explanations!" The silence that followed was electrifying. Jake straightened slowly, looked her straight in the eyes, and responded in perfect Dutch, pronounced with the elegance of someone who had studied at the finest European universities. Victoria's mouth dropped open, realizing she had just insulted someone hiding secrets that would change her life forever. Rodriguez Auto Repair sat in the industrial outskirts of Los Angeles, a world light years away from the golden boardrooms where Victoria Sterling was accustomed to moving. The walls stained with grease, air that smelled of gasoline and metal, the sounds of tools echoing under the low ceiling. It was the last place where a woman who owned the fifth largest pharmaceutical empire in America would want to find herself on a Tuesday morning. But the Ferrari F8 Tributo had betrayed her trust at exactly the wrong moment. During the drive to the quarterly presentation that would determine the future of a $200 million acquisition, the engine had started emitting an unsettling metallic sound. Victoria had to choose between missing the most important meeting of the year or stopping at the first repair shop she could find. She stepped out of the flaming red car with the lethal grace of an angry feline. Her $1,000 Louboutin heels clicked on the oil-stained concrete floor like a declaration of war. The charcoal grey Armani suit cost more than a worker's annual salary, but in that moment it was just elegant armor for her frustration. Jake Mitchell was working under the hood of a Honda Civic when he heard the distinctive rumble of the Ferrari entering the courtyard. 35 years old, 6 feet tall, lean but strong physique forged by years of manual labor. Brown hair always slightly tousled, 3-day beard framing a face with sharp but kind features. What stood out most were his eyes, green as emeralds, full of intelligence that seemed out of place in that industrial environment. When he saw Victoria step out of the Ferrari, Jake immediately understood he was dealing with the type of client who considered mechanics little more than servants. He'd seen that arrogance before, in the looks of certain luxury car owners, the conviction that money made them superior to anyone who worked with their hands. Victoria threatened him about not accepting errors or delays, emphasizing how much her car cost and how little he probably earned. Jake didn't respond to the provocations. He simply approached the Ferrari with the professional respect he reserved for all vehicles, regardless of their value or the owner's character. He opened the hood with confident gestures and began the inspection, ears attentive to engine sounds, hands feeling vibrations invisible to inexperienced eyes. After several minutes of careful analysis, he diagnosed a problem in the timing system, irregular chain tension creating interference with the valves. It was a known defect of this series, he explained, especially after the first 50,000 miles. Victoria's explosion echoed through the shop like a whip crack. The other mechanics stopped working, turning toward the scene with expressions of disbelief. No one had ever heard anyone insult Jake that way, and everyone knew there was something about their colleague that went beyond what appeared on the surface. Jake straightened slowly, closed the hood with a calm gesture, cleaned his hands with a rag, without ever taking his eyes off Victoria's face. What she saw in those green eyes wasn't anger or humiliation, but a sort of weary disappointment at yet another demonstration of human arrogance. When Jake opened his mouth to respond, what came out left Victoria completely speechless, perfect Dutch, pronounced with the elegance of someone who had studied that language at the finest European universities. The accent was impeccable, sentence construction sophisticated, the controlled tone of someone accustomed to high-level academic debates. Victoria stood with her mouth agape, her brain struggling to process what she had heard. A suburban mechanic who spoke Dutch like a university professor? It was impossible. It was absurd. Jake looked at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, full of bitter irony and unspoken secrets. He even knew her name, which shook her even more. Who the hell was this mechanic? Victoria stared at Jake with a mixture of shock and curiosity she hadn't felt in years. Her analytical mind worked frantically to understand who the man in front of her really was. Jake continued working on the Ferrari with precise, confident movements, but now Victoria noticed details that had escaped her before. The way he handled tools betrayed deep knowledge not just of mechanics, but of advanced automotive engineering. His hands moved with the elegance of a surgeon, and when he explained technical problems, he used terms that went far beyond the skills of a simple suburban mechanic. When Victoria asked about his impressive Dutch, Jake stopped and looked her straight in the eyes. The revelation that followed hit her like lightning. Technical University of Delft, PhD in Aerospace Engineering with specialization in advanced propulsion. 8 years in the Netherlands, first as a student, then as a researcher for the European Renewable Energy Consortium. A PhD from TU Delft was one of the most prestigious titles in Europe in the engineering field. It was the type of credentials that opened doors at the world's best technology companies. But then, what was he doing in that shop? Jake leaned against the Ferrari's fender, and for the first time, Victoria saw a crack in his armor of controlled professionalism. The story he told was one of family sacrifice. His sister Lucy had had a car accident 3 years earlier, severe brain damage, need for constant care. His 70-year-old mother couldn't handle everything alone. He'd left the research laboratory, returned to America. The aerospace industry doesn't forgive long absences. When he had tried to get back in, he found himself out of the loop. Rodriguez, the shop owner, was an old family friend who had offered him work when everyone else had closed doors in his face. Victoria felt very small. She had spent her life judging people by professional success, by external status symbols. But this man had sacrificed a brilliant career for family love, had given up his dreams to care for those he loved. Jake explained that repairing engines had taught him things that 8 years of university had never shown him. Every problem has a solution if you have the patience to look for it. Honest work has a dignity that no academic title can give or take away. And above all, he had learned to recognize people by character, not by wallet. It was a lesson Victoria had never received in 32 years of privileged life. She had always thought the world was divided into winners and losers, but Jake had just demonstrated that much more complex and nuanced categories existed. The engine was repaired. The problem was exactly what he had explained at the beginning. Loose timing chain, irregular tension creating interference. He had adjusted everything. The Ferrari was working perfectly now. Victoria pulled out her wallet, but instead of taking money, she pulled out a Sterling Pharmaceuticals business card. She had a proposal for him, she said, using his name for the first time. Jake immediately recognized the Sterling Pharmaceuticals logo. He knew the company, the innovative research on cancer drugs, partnerships with the best American universities. He spoke about Victoria's company with technical competence, not with the superficial admiration reserved for economic success. Victoria felt growing excitement for an idea taking shape in her mind. They had a research and development department working on innovative technologies for pharmaceutical production. Jake's background in aerospace engineering would be perfect for what they were trying to develop. Jake looked at her with skeptical expression. He couldn't leave Los Angeles, couldn't commit to fixed hours because of his sister. But Victoria had already thought of everything: research headquarters in LA, flexible consulting contract. What interested her was his brain, his experience. Jake's question was direct. Why? An hour before, she had called him an ignorant moron. What had changed? Victoria breathed deeply, preparing for a confession she had never made to anyone. She had realized she had made a colossal mistake. She had spent her life surrounding herself with yes men, with high-sounding titles, who didn't have the courage to contradict her. She had built an empire based on the idea that economic success was the only measure of a person's value. Jake had taught her in 1 hour what 20 years of business school hadn't managed to do. He had shown her that true intelligence isn't measured by bank account, that real competence is seen in results. And above all, that character is forged in sacrifices, not privileges. It wasn't the fact that he spoke perfect Dutch or had a PhD from TU Delft. It was the fact that he had given up everything to care for his sister. It was the type of character she wanted in her company, the type of person she wanted to work with. Jake looked around the shop, at colleagues who continued working, then brought his eyes back to Victoria.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
For the first time since they'd known each other, she saw a real smile light up his face. She had an hour for that important meeting, he said, looking at his watch. She could go. He would think about it. Victoria got in the car and started the engine. The Ferrari purred perfectly. The metallic sound had completely disappeared. Jake had done perfect work, as he had promised. Before leaving, she thanked Jake for what he had taught her, whatever his final decision might be. 2 weeks later, Victoria found herself obsessively checking her phone, hoping for a call that never came. Jake hadn't gotten in touch, and she had started thinking she had overestimated the impact of their conversation. But one Thursday morning, her secretary informed her that a certain Jake Mitchell was in reception. Victoria personally went down to welcome him, something she never did for any visitor. When she saw Jake in civilian clothes, dark jeans and blue shirt that made his green eyes stand out, she was struck by how different he looked outside the shop context. Jake had thought about the proposal and had some conditions. Flexible hours for his sister's physical therapy, real projects, not decorative consulting, maintaining part-time work at the shop to not abandon Rodriguez, who had helped him. Victoria accepted everything, but wanted to officially apologize for what she had said at the shop. It had been unforgivable and reflected a wrong way of thinking she had cultivated her whole life. Jake had opened her eyes to who she had become, and she didn't like it at all. In the following days, Jake began working part-time in Sterling Pharmaceutical's laboratories. Victoria could see in action the intelligence she had glimpsed at the shop. His approach to technical problems was revolutionary. He combined engineering precision with practical intuition born from field experience. The first project involved optimizing production systems for a new cancer drug. Jake studied the process for a week, then presented a solution that would reduce production times by 40% and costs by 25%, maintaining maximum product quality. But what struck Victoria most was seeing how Jake interacted with the research team. There was no trace of intellectual superiority. He didn't try to impress anyone with his resume. He listened to everyone's ideas, from senior researchers to lab technicians, had the rare gift of making every person feel valued for their contribution. When Victoria told him he had a natural talent for leadership, Jake replied it wasn't leadership, but respect. When you've worked with your hands, you understand that every job has its dignity, and every person has something to teach. It was a lesson Victoria was learning day by day, working alongside this man who had transformed her vision of success and human value. 3 months after the collaboration began, Jake's project had produced results that exceeded every expectation. The new system had not only improved efficiency as predicted, but had opened possibilities for applications Victoria hadn't even imagined. The board had unanimously approved expansion of the research budget. But for Victoria, professional success had become secondary to something more personal growing inside her. Working beside Jake every day had shown her a completely different way of living, more authentic, more centered on values that really mattered. One evening, while they had stayed in the lab beyond closing time to perfect a prototype, Victoria made a decision that both scared and excited her. She asked about his sister Lucy, whom Jake always spoke of with affection but without going into details. Jake told her Lucy was better. Physical therapy was giving results slowly but constantly. She would never fully recover the motor functions she'd had before, but had recovered much more than doctors had initially hoped. She was the most courageous person he knew, Jake said. When Victoria expressed the desire to meet Lucy, the smile that lit up Jake's face was the most beautiful response she had ever received. The following Saturday, Victoria found herself in a small apartment in a residential area of Los Angeles she had never frequented. It was clean, welcoming, full of books and photos that told the story of a family united by love and shared difficulties. Lucy Mitchell was 28 years old and had the brightest smile Victoria had ever seen. Despite the evident motor difficulties, she emanated a serenity and inner strength that immediately put the visitor at ease. Lucy was a writer. Before the accident, she worked as a freelance journalist. Now she was writing a book about resilience and the ability to rebuild life after tragedy. Victoria was impressed by the quality of the manuscript she let her read. When she left that evening, Victoria carried with her much more than just another acquaintance. She had seen Jake in his natural environment, surrounded by the family love that had shaped him, and had understood where his inner strength came from. As Jake walked her to the car, for the first time Victoria saw something different in his expression. No longer just professional respect or collegial friendship, but something deeper and more personal. In these months of working together, Jake confessed, something had changed. It was no longer just a professional relationship, at least not for him. Victoria felt the world stop around them. It was what she hoped to hear, but also what scared her most. She was afraid of ruining everything they had built. Jake approached, gently took her hands in his. They were still the hands of a man who worked, strong and sure, but now they touched her with infinite tenderness. In that moment, in the parking lot of a small Los Angeles suburb condominium, Victoria understood she had found something all her millions could never have bought: true love. 1 year after that first clash at the auto shop, Victoria woke up in an apartment that bore no resemblance to the luxurious penthouse where she had lived for 10 years. It was smaller, simpler, but infinitely warmer than the crystal palace she had called home. Jake still slept beside her, hair tousled from sleep, relaxed face showing that peace Victoria had learned to recognize and protect. On the nightstand was their wedding photo. Simple ceremony at City Hall, with Lucy as witness for Jake and Rodriguez from the shop as witness for her. No extravagance, just the people who really mattered. From the kitchen window, she could see the courtyard where the building's children played before going to school. Mothers greeting each other affectionately, a neighborhood life she had never known in her ivory tower. Lucy had met David, a physical therapist from the rehabilitation center 6 months earlier. He was a sweet and patient man who saw in her not the accident's limitations, but the incredible strength with which she had overcome them. Her book had been published 3 months earlier and had become a bestseller, touching thousands of people. Sterling Pharmaceuticals had completely changed under the new shared leadership of Victoria and Jake. The company hadn't lost anything in terms of profits. In fact, the innovations introduced had significantly increased margins, but had gained something much more precious: a soul. Employees were no longer considered resources to exploit, but people with stories, families, dreams. Victoria had instituted training programs for technicians, created a company daycare, introduced flexible hours for those with particular family needs. Rodriguez from the shop told stories that Victoria had become famous as the millionaire who learned humility. Mechanics came hoping to meet her, to see if it was true that she now greeted everyone and thanked them for work done. The laboratory where they worked together had become a model for the European pharmaceutical industry. Jake had developed 3 innovative patents that had revolutionized cancer drug production. But what made their team really special was the atmosphere of collaboration and mutual respect they had created. One evening, while walking home together, Victoria asked Jake if he ever had regrets about the abandoned aerospace career, about dreams he'd had to change. Jake stopped and looked at her with that gentle seriousness she loved so much. He had discovered that dreams aren't fixed destinations, but directions that can change course without losing value. His dream was to use science to improve the world. He was doing it, just differently than he had imagined. True freedom isn't the absence of bonds, Jake explained. It's choosing the bonds that make you a better person. When they got home, they found Lucy waiting for them with David and a bottle of champagne. They had news. They were getting married. The celebration that followed was simple and perfect, like all the beautiful things in their new life. That night, while Jake slept beside her, Victoria thought back to the angry scream that had changed her life. It seemed like the cry of another person, a woman who had confused success with happiness, power with strength, having with being. The mechanic who had silenced her in Dutch had taught her the most precious lesson, that true intelligence often hides in the most unexpected places, that authentic love is born from mutual respect, and that the greatest wealth is building something beautiful together with the people you love. Before falling asleep, Victoria smiled, thinking that sometimes all it takes is an insult spoken in the wrong place to discover you've met the right man at the right time of your life. It's like if you believe true intelligence isn't recognized by the clothes you wear. Comment sharing a moment when you misjudge someone from first impression. Share to honor those who work honestly, whatever their profession. Subscribe for more stories of transformations born from the most unexpected encounters. Sometimes arrogance is just fear disguised as superiority. Sometimes the person who silences you is the one who teaches you to truly listen. And sometimes all it takes is a misplaced insult to discover you have the love of your life in front of you.